Alright, buckle up because what you're about to hear is one of the sharpest exchanges on UK immigration policy we've seen in a long time. Right from the start, Chris Murray challenges the Home Secretary on one of the government's hottest topics: migration targets. Why do we have strict benchmarks on knife crime and violence against women but not on immigration? That's a bold opening shot, and it sets the stage for a tense back and forth. Keep listening closely because the Home Secretary isn't just defending numbers here. She's defending public confidence, political credibility, and the government's entire strategy on migration control. And trust me, what unfolds says a lot about how policy is really made.
And Chris Murray.
Thank you, Chair. And can I draw the committee's attention to my register of interests and the support my office receives from RAMP? Home Secretary, I want to ask you about the immigration white paper that you published a fortnight ago, which is one of the biggest changes in British migration policy for a long time. You have said you're committed to lowering net migration, but on violence against women and girls, you've set a target. On knife crime, you've set a target, but on migration, you haven't. I want to ask you why that is. And the Migration Advisory Committee have said that their view is that it's not just the aggregate number of migrants in the country, it's the different types of migration you get. Do you agree with the MAC on that?
So I think, look, the starting point is we've got a history in this area where I think confidence has understandably plummeted. There have been a lot of promises made to people across the country about what would happen to net migration under the previous Conservative government, a lot of promises that were made about what the impact of the new Brexit agreements would be, about what the impact of government policies would be on net migration. And actually the opposite happened. So we saw net migration quadruple in the space of just 4 years, in a period in which the government had made a formal commitment to bring net migration down. I think, therefore, we're not going to take that approach. We're not going to do things that just undermine confidence further. We're going to instead just take practical steps, step by step, as we set out in the white paper. We have identified the impact of some, not all, of the measures in the white paper. So the measures around the English language higher standards, the higher standards for the skilled visa, the higher skills thresholds, the removal of the care worker visa from abroad, a series of those measures, and the combined impact of those is to further reduce the visas issued by expected around 100,000. So we will set out those sorts of measures, and of course the net migration statistics will continue to be published so people will identify and be able to see the progress. But I think the confidence issue is an important one in terms of not setting specific targets that end up undermining that process. I do agree, though, that there are also different kinds of migration and that we need to look at those very differently. So, of course, international students coming here to study, to learn, to bring new investment into not just our higher education institutions, but into our economy and into communities is really important. And we will always want to benefit from the highest levels of global talent. But the scale of increase that we had in the social care visa, for example, meant we had huge exploitation as a result, and it meant that too often employers were ending up driving a big increase in overseas recruitment rather than dealing with issues around skills or pay and conditions here in the UK, and that's really damaging actually for the economy as well as for the immigration system and for confidence in the immigration system. So it's right that we have a different approach for different kinds of migration, for different skills levels, for the different impact and so on they have, but also why we do this within a broader framework which says the objectives of the Immigration White Paper are to bring net migration down, to restore order and control to a system that had become really chaotic, and also to make sure we can better link the immigration system with the skills and with the economy, the domestic expansion of the domestic skills and the domestic workforce that we need.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Home Secretary. I mean, I just want to pry a little bit on that confidence issue, because if you're saying that the reason you don't want to set a target on immigration is because of public confidence, that sort of implies that you know what the target is, but you just don't want to be clear with the public about it, because if you miss it, that may damage confidence. So is that true? Have I got that right? And if so, doesn't that also read across to your other targets? So if you miss the target on violence against women and girls, for example, won't that damage confidence in that system too?
Well, I think there's a particular issue about confidence in the immigration system, and really frankly quite understandably, because the way in which those numbers shot up in such a short period of time, I've described this as I think this really was a sort of free market experiment in which effectively employers were encouraged to recruit from abroad, including being given a 20% discount on the wages that they were able to pay for people who they recruited from abroad below the going rate, which makes no sense at all, because that applied to shortage occupations, where it may well have been that in those shortage occupations, part of the answer to preventing them being shortage occupations would be to actually pay people properly and to increase pay rather than to have a 20% discount. At the same time, as there were no requirements to train here in the UK. So I think there's a particular challenge around the lack of confidence in the immigration system, which I think is different from the approach to violence against women and girls, where we're trying to drive the whole system and different organisations and agencies to feel part of that mission as well. And then I also think it also reflects back to the other point that you made. So we want international students to continue, but we don't think, and we agree with the previous government belatedly at the very end of their period, that we don't think that short-term master students should be bringing dependents. We think that we need to have global talent, and we need to make sure that we've got the right approach for those high potential individuals, but we
Notice what just happened here. Murray presses hard, essentially accusing the Home Secretary of hiding behind confidence as a reason not to set migration targets. That's a clever angle, because it forces the Home Secretary to admit whether this is about actual policy or just about political optics. The response: she blames the previous government's free market experiment with overseas recruitment, even highlighting the 20% wage discount that encouraged cheaper foreign labor. Now here's the big question for you. Do you buy this reasoning? Or is this just passing the blame onto past governments instead of taking responsibility today? Drop your thoughts below. I'm curious where you stand.
Should not have the care work being recruited from abroad. So we are differentiating. There's an overall approach, which is net migration needs to come down, but it's also about restoring control and recognising the different kinds of controls we would have in the system for different kinds of migration.
Great, thank you. And so you started touching there on the economic impact of migration, and it's obviously clear that the government's number one mission is economic growth. But I think this is the first white paper the government has published that doesn't, address economic growth particularly. So I wanted to ask, why was that, and what's your view on the economic impact of migration? And just returning to that point about different types of migrants having different impacts. Do you think it's too crude to see all migrants the same when you analyse their impact on the economy? Because I know the OBR does that, and I wonder what your view of that is.
So I think one of the things that we highlight as part of the immigration white paper is the importance of increasing domestic skills, and what that does is that actually also improves our productivity. In the period in which we saw net migration quadruple, and the biggest driver was increase in overseas recruitment and an increase in work visas during that period, we also saw reductions in the level of investment in skills in the UK, the reductions in the level of training in the UK, and we also saw a big increase in the number of working age people who were inactive and who were not in the labour force at all. And those things are related, and that's why it's really important that we have a broader approach to the labour market that looks at all of the different aspects, instead of just thinking, well, there's a labour market problem, what's the answer? Oh, well, let's increase migration. Actually, that is counterproductive for our economic growth, that is counterproductive for our long-term economic sustainability, and counterproductive for productivity. I think we are talking about shifting from what had been, over the last 5 years, high immigration, low skills approach to the economy, to bringing down immigration and making sure we boost skills. So immigration will always be an important part of the UK for generations. People have come to the UK to work in our NHS or to start up businesses or to be part of our universities. That has always been important and will continue to be so. But it has to be controlled and managed. The immigration system has to be controlled and managed. Otherwise, it's not fair, it's not effective, and it's not sustainable. And that's why the whole approach is about that restoring control and order to the system. And by doing so, I think that helps support growth rather than always being seen as this sort of polarised approach that somehow runs contrary to growth.
Thank you. And then my final question is exactly on that question on skills and immigration. The concern would be that as you reduce the people coming into the country, there's a skills gap that isn't met by the domestic workforce fast enough. And we see that in a lot of sectors, but some of them are really critical to the government achieving its objectives. I'm thinking particularly of house building. How confident are you you're working with other departments and other key sector stakeholders to manage any skills gaps that would be an externality of your policy?
Construction's a really good example. So construction will continue to be on the temporary shortage list, so the new temporary shortage list, but the difference between the temporary shortage list and the previous lists that the government's had with discounts and so on is the temporary shortage list, the whole approach should be, first of all, that this should be a temporary arrangement, that secondly, this needs to be combined with having a workforce strategy in place. So we already have the important components now with the work that Bridget Phillipson has announced to train up 60,000 construction workers over the next few years. So these two things go hand in hand, and it's a very good example of, yes, there should be provision under the temporary shortage list to recruit from overseas, but it has to be alongside that training and that domestic workforce strategy. So the new approach we want is the Labour Market Evidence Group, which should bring together the different skills bodies, including not just Skills England, but the different devolved skilled organisations and governments as well, alongside DWP, because that is about labour market access, alongside the Industrial Strategy Council, because that's also about the role of employers and some of the issues around terms and conditions and the way in which that impacts as well, and the Migration Advisory Committee. And for these different labour market bodies that have all only looked at one aspect of labour market policy in the past, there's been no overview that says, do you know what, we've got a huge shortage of construction workers, so what are we going to do? How are we bringing all of this partnership together? And to properly bring that together with the Labour Market Evidence Group, for them to then identify what are the key priority areas that we need workforce strategies drawn up, and then from the MAC, from the point of view of the immigration system, to say, okay, are these workforce strategies being met? Are they drawn up? Are they adequate? And what does this mean in terms of whether an occupation should go on the temporary shortage list and how long for? So that allows then for occupations on the temporary shortage list to be capped or to be time limited, and to have those additional controls and safeguards in place.
Great, thank you.
And there you have it, a heated exchange that touched on migration targets, wage discounts, overseas recruitment, the economy, and the looming skills gap in construction. The Home Secretary insists the new white paper restores order by reducing reliance on foreign labour and investing in domestic skills. But critics argue that without hard targets, the government risks repeating old mistakes. So did today's testimony reassure the public or raise even more doubts about the government's ability to deliver? That's the question only time will answer. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping courtroom and political breakdowns every week.